Inside the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace, young women disappeared into a world they could never escape. Visual, slow tracking shot through ornate palace hallways, golden light filtering through latticed windows, shadows moving behind silk curtains. They weren't killed, but something arguably worse happened to them. What fate could strip away everything you were while keeping you alive? Between the 1400s and early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire stretched across 3 continents, controlling millions of lives through military might and rigid social systems. At the empire's heart sat the Imperial Harem, a secluded institution where captured women and girls lived their entire lives. Visual, map showing Ottoman Empire at its peak in 1683, then zooming to its... These weren't volunteers or honored guests, they were captives, often virgins, specifically selected for their youth, taken through organized slave raids across the Balkans, Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. Understanding this system matters today because the patterns of control, erasure, and exploitation it perfected still echo in modern forms of human trafficking and forced servitude. The system began taking shape in the late 1300s under Sultan Murad I, running parallel to the better-known Devshirme conscription of boys. Young women, some as young as 8, were acquired through raids conducted by Crimean Tatars and other forces paying tribute to the empire source. Leslie Peirce, the Imperial Harem, 1993. They arrived in Istanbul in chains, their journey often lasting months. Visual, animated route map from Balkans and Caucasus to Istanbul. 19th centuries, upon arrival at Topkapi Palace, transformation began immediately. Birth names were erased and replaced with Turkish or Persian names. Native languages were forbidden. Religious practices were suppressed through isolation and forced conversion document. Ottoman Palace Registers, Topkapi Archive. According to palace records analyzed by historian Ehud Toledano, resistance meant punishment cells, solitary confinement, or transfer to harsher provincial estates. Source: Toledano, Slavery and Abolition in the Ottoman Middle East, 1998. Lower third. Peak harem population, 400 to 800 women. 17th centuries, the women entered a strict hierarchy as asimi, or novices. Most would spend decades rising through servant ranks, doing laundry, embroidery, and attending senior women. A tiny fraction, perhaps 2%, became concubines to the Sultan. Even fewer became mothers of princes, which brought power but not freedom. Source: Demographic Analysis by Alan Fisher, Muscovy, and the Black Sea Slave Trade, 1972. The vast majority served in anonymity until old age or death, never leaving the palace walls. Question: happens to your identity after 40 years of silence? European diplomatic accounts from the 1500s through 1800s confirm the system's scale and permanence. Venetian ambassadors and British consuls documented interviews with freed women and eunuch guards. Source: Calendar of State Papers, Venice, various volumes. 1856 British consular record describes a woman called Zeinab who spent 38 years doing needlework after being captured at age 10 from Georgia. Source: British National Archives, Faux 78, 1247. She told the translator she felt buried alive inside someone else's body. The harem wasn't dissolved until 1909, after the Young Turk Revolution. Elderly women who had lived inside for 60 or 70 years suddenly had nowhere to go. The empire that erased their identities provided no pension, no way home, and no acknowledgement of what had been done. The evidence comes from multiple independent sources that corroborate each other. Ottoman Palace archives preserved at Topkapi Museum contain purchase ledgers, assignment logs, and punishment records document. Imperial Treasury records, catalogued 1924 to 1960. These bureaucratic documents list ages, prices, physical descriptions, and rank progressions with cold administrative precision. Visual, archival document on screen with English translation overlay. External verification comes from European diplomatic reports spanning for centuries. While some accounts contain Orientalist exaggeration, core facts about confinement, forced conversion, and lifelong servitude match what Ottoman sources record. Source: French diplomatic archives, various dates, British Foreign Office dispatches, 1840, segundos, 1860s. The most powerful evidence comes from the rare testimony of escaped or freed women documented by abolitionists and consular officials. Infocard, confirmed by archives versus estimated from demographic models. Historian Leslie Purse's analysis of hundreds of palace documents revealed that sexual exploitation was only one dimension of control. The harem functioned primarily as a labor institution and political training ground. Source, Purse, 1993. Chapters 4 to 6. Most women experienced it as permanent servitude wrapped in elaborate ritual. Academic estimates suggests between 80,000 and 200,000 women passed through Ottoman elite households via this system between 1453 and 1700 alone, with the Imperial Harem absorbing a fraction of that total. Source, Fisher, 1972. Some historians emphasize that not all harem women were slaves. A minority entered through political arrangement, sent as daughters of allied rulers with status and retinues intact. These women experienced vastly different conditions than captured servants. Sidebar: political brides does not equal captive servants. Different paths, different treatment. There's scholarly debate about comparing Ottoman slavery to European colonial systems. Historian Madeline Zilfi notes that Ottoman practices operated under different legal frameworks, sometimes allowed manumission, and lacked the racial ideologies of Atlantic slavery. Source, Zilfi, Men in Slavery in the Late Ottoman Empire, 2010. This doesn't minimize harm, but adds nuance to historical comparison. A major gap exists in direct testimony. The overwhelming majority of captive women left no written records. We rely on external observers, bureaucratic documents, and rare survivor accounts. What thousands of women actually thought and felt remains largely unknown. A silence that itself testifies to the system's effectiveness at erasure. Some modern Turkish scholarship argues that Western accounts sensationalize the harem for political reasons, which has merit regarding some lurid 19th century literature. Doesn't negate documented evidence from Ottoman sources themselves. Imagine being 12 years old when armed men raid your village. You're marched for weeks to a city you've never seen, inside a palace beyond imagination. You're given a new name in a language you don't speak. Your family will never know what happened to you. You will never see them again. This was the beginning of a life measured in decades of waiting and forgetting. You forgot your mother's voice. You forgot prayers in your first language. You became, slowly, someone you wouldn't recognize. The few women who left testimony described not sharp grief, but gradual dissolution. The erosion of self over years of enforced silence and transformation. Visual, empty palace courtyard at twilight. Single figure in silhouette. Even the rare women who bore princes faced impossible choices. Palace politics meant new sultans often executed their brothers to prevent civil war. If your son lost, you watched him die. If he won, you gained influence, but remained captive to the system that had imprisoned you from childhood. There was no path that led home. To understand why captives call this worse than death, we must distinguish between ending and erasure. Death ends a life, but the person remains in memory and story. Erasure is different. It's the replacement of who you were with, who you're forced to become, while you're still conscious to experience the loss. Think of identity like a language. If you stop speaking it, you don't just lose words. You lose the particular way your family understood the world, made jokes, and shared grief. The harem systematically deleted the cultural grammar that made each woman who she was. This is why survivors use terms like ghost, shadow, and living burial. This matters beyond history. The logic of organized erasure masked as order appears across time in different forms. Residential schools stripping indigenous children of language, forced assimilation programs, modern trafficking networks. Understanding the harem's methods helps us recognize similar patterns today. Legal scholar Sally Engel, Mary calls this structural violence, harm built into systems rather than individual acts. Source, Mary, Human Rights, and Gender Violence, 2006. The Ottoman harem was structural violence perfected through architecture, ritual, and bureaucracy. Pattern break, the system. Documented, the scale, estimated in tens of thousands. The individual voices, mostly lost to silence. The Ottoman Imperial Harem operated for over 5 centuries, transforming captured women into servants and, rarely, mothers of princes. Most endured something different, lifelong confinement, and the systematic erasure of who they had been before the palace gates closed. The women deserve to be remembered as themselves, not as the empire remade them. Historians continued digitizing Topkapi archives, revealing more details about individual women, purchase networks, and daily life. We may recover more names and stories. Confidence. High. Human rights researchers increasingly study historical slavery systems to understand modern trafficking patterns, using documented methods of isolation and control to strengthen intervention strategies. Confidence. Medium. Within Turkish academia, younger scholars are producing more critical, evidence-based work on the empire's slavery systems. Whether this leads to broader public reckoning remains uncertain, as the topic remains politically sensitive. Confidence. Low. The challenge endures. How do we honor people who were deliberately made forgettable? Trapped not in dramatic rebellion, but in enforced quiet and routine invisibility. The women who passed through Topkapi's harem walls experienced one of history's most systematic erasures, where being forgotten alive was the most common fate. To understand the parallel system that shaped the same empire, watch next, the Devshirme system. How empires turned children into soldiers. It explores how institutional control operated across gender and purpose within Ottoman power structures.